My name is Claire, and I am 34 years old, and my life turned upside down the day my grandparents passed away and left me everything they had ever worked for. What should have been a bittersweet blessing quickly became a nightmare, because instead of being supported, I found myself at war with the very people who should have been happiest for me, my own parents. Growing up, my grandparents, Margaret and Henry, were the steady heartbeat of my childhood. While my parents, Susan and David, were often absent, busy chasing careers, money, or their own fleeting ambitions, my grandparents were always there. They picked me up from school, attended every recital, and listened to me cry when I was bullied in middle school. They didn't just give me love, they gave me stability. Their small farmhouse in the countryside became my safe haven, a place where I felt seen, heard, and cherished. It was in that kitchen, smelling of cinnamon and old wood, that I learned what family was supposed to feel like. My parents, on the other hand, always seemed to view me as an inconvenience. They had me young, and I was constantly reminded that I had interrupted their lives. My mother once told me, half joking but with an edge of bitterness, "If it weren't for you, we'd be living in Europe right now." My father, stern and practical, believed emotions were weakness. His way of showing care was paying for things but never giving time. The only people who ever truly made me feel like I belonged were my grandparents. When I got the call that they had both passed, my grandfather from a heart attack in his sleep, and my grandmother just 3 weeks later, as though she couldn't bear to live without him. I was shattered. I spent days in their farmhouse, going through old photo albums, crying into the worn fabric of the armchair my grandfather always sat in. It felt like the world had taken away the only people who had loved me unconditionally. The funeral was tense. My parents acted strangely distant, not out of grief, but as if they were already calculating something in their heads. My brother, Alan, and my sister, Rebecca, showed up too, both of them barely speaking to me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too consumed by loss to notice the shadows forming. But I would soon find out what they were all thinking. 2 weeks after the funeral, the lawyer called me into his office to read the will. I remember sitting in that leather chair, my hands trembling, expecting to hear that everything would be divided among the family. But as the lawyer read aloud, my breath caught. My grandparents had left everything to me: the farmhouse, the land, the savings account, and even my grandmother's small jewelry collection that had been in the family for generations. Their reasoning was clear in the letter they left behind. "Claire, you are the one who stood by us, who loved us, without condition. This is our way of making sure you're taken care of." Tears streamed down my face as I read those words, but before I could even finish, I felt the burning stares of my parents and siblings. My mother's voice was the first to cut through the silence. "This must be a mistake," she said sharply. "Surely, the estate should be divided equally." My father's jaw tightened, his eyes cold. "We'll contest this," he muttered. Rebecca crossed her arms and sneered. "So you get everything, and we get nothing? That's not fair, Claire." And Alan simply shook his head, muttering under his breath. The lawyer tried to explain that the will was airtight, signed and notarized, but my family didn't care. In that moment, any illusion that we were united in grief shattered. I realized with horror that my parents weren't mourning their loss. They were mourning the money they hadn't inherited. That night, I drove back to the farmhouse, clutching the letter my grandparents had written me. I walked through the creaking halls, touching the furniture, smelling the faint trace of my grandmother's lavender perfume, and I whispered to them, "Why did you do this? You knew they'd hate me for it." My voice cracked, and I sank to the floor in tears. I loved them for trusting me, but I also feared what it meant, because I knew my family wouldn't let this go easily, and I was right. Within days, my parents were calling me constantly, insisting that I do the right thing and split the inheritance. My father lectured me coldly. "That money belongs to the family, not just you. Don't be selfish." My mother begged, guilt dripping in her voice. "Claire, we raised you. We deserve something back for all those years." And Rebecca accused me outright of manipulation. "You must have pressured them into this. Admit it." Each call left me shaking, my stomach in knots. The worst part was that a small part of me still wanted their approval. I wanted to scream that I hadn't asked for this, that I would have given up every penny just to have my grandparents back. But instead, I sat in silence, clutching their letter, reminding myself that they had chosen me for a reason. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of strength I had. My family wasn't just going to ask, they were going to fight. And I was about to discover how ugly blood ties could become when money was involved. The first sign that things were going to spiral came one chilly Monday morning when I opened my mailbox and found a thick envelope addressed to me. Inside was a formal letter from my parents' lawyer. My hands shook as I read the words, "Notice of intent to contest the will of Margaret and Henry Whitmore." My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I had hoped their anger would burn out after a few days, that they'd realize the will was my grandparents' choice, not mine. Instead, they were ready to drag me into court. I called my mother immediately, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? You know what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. Why can't you just respect their decision?" Her response was icy. "Because it's unfair, Claire. They were our parents, not just yours. We deserve a share. If you really cared about this family, you'd do the right thing." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. The right thing? The right thing would be honoring their wishes. They wanted me to have it because they trusted me. My mother's tone hardened. "Then prepare yourself. We'll see you in court." She hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. My parents, along with Alan and Rebecca, turned cold and hostile. Family dinners were canceled. Phone calls went unanswered. The only messages I received were bitter texts from Rebecca accusing me of being greedy, or Alan sending me sarcastic notes like, "Enjoy the money while it lasts." At night, I lay awake in my grandparents' farmhouse, listening to the creaks of the old house and wondering if I had made a mistake by not just giving in. But then I'd take out the letter my grandparents left me, read their words again, and remind myself, this wasn't about greed. This was about trust. The court process was brutal. Their lawyer painted me as manipulative, suggesting that I had influenced my grandparents when they were vulnerable. They dug into every detail of my relationship with them, twisting it into something ugly. I had to sit there, in that stiff courtroom chair, and listen as my own parents implied that I had tricked two of the only people who had ever loved me. I wanted to scream, to remind everyone of the years I spent by their side, of the countless nights I stayed with Grandma when she was sick, of the hours I helped Grandpa in the garden. But instead, I stayed calm, clutching my lawyer's arm to steady myself. My lawyer, a steady man named Daniel Harper, reminded the judge again and again that the will had been written clearly, signed, and notarized under proper conditions. There was no evidence of coercion. The decedents made their choice freely, Daniel repeated, his calm voice a lifeline to me. Still, I could feel the daggers in my family's eyes every time he spoke. They weren't just angry at the will, they were angry at me. Outside the courtroom, the war continued. My mother showed up uninvited at the farmhouse one evening, her face tight with fury. "Claire, listen to me," she hissed as she stood in the doorway. "You're tearing this family apart. If you cared about us, you'd split the inheritance. This house, this land, it belongs to us too." I held my ground, though my voice trembled.
"No, ma'am.
It belongs to me. Grandma and Grandpa made that choice, and I won't dishonor them by giving in." She stared at me, her eyes cold. "Then don't come crying to us when you lose everything." And with that, she left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The stress began to eat away at me. I lost weight. My hair started falling out, and there were mornings when I could barely drag myself out of bed. Friends noticed the change, but I was too ashamed to explain everything. How could I admit that my own parents were trying to strip me of the only gift my grandparents had left me? The betrayal cut so deep that words barely scratched the surface. Then, in the middle of all this chaos, I found something that gave me strength. I was cleaning out one of my grandmother's old drawers when I discovered a diary. Inside, she had written about her life, her fears, and, most importantly, her love for me. One passage made me sob until my chest ached. Claire is the one who understands us. She never asks for anything, only gives. When we are gone, I want her to feel safe, to feel chosen. She deserves it. Reading those words was like having her voice back in the room, soothing me. It reminded me that this inheritance wasn't about money or property. It was about love, about two people who had chosen me when no one else did. Armed with that strength, I walked back into court the next week with my head held higher. I couldn't control what my parents did or said, but I could honor my grandparents by fighting for what they wanted. And deep down, I promised myself that even if I lost everything in court, I wouldn't lose the truth of who they were or what they meant to me. But the war was far from over, and I had no idea just how ruthless my family could become when greed consumed them completely. The longer the legal battle stretched on, the more toxic my family became. It wasn't just about the court hearings anymore. It seeped into every part of my life. My phone was filled with voicemails from Rebecca, her voice dripping with venom. "You're pathetic, Claire. You think Grandma and Grandpa really meant to cut us out? You must have manipulated them. You've always been the spoiled one." I would sit on the edge of my bed, listening to her words, tears sliding down my cheeks, wondering how my own sister could spit such hatred at me. Alan wasn't much better. He sent me emails listing out reasonable divisions of the estate, as if this were some kind of negotiation, and when I didn't respond, he wrote, "Don't be surprised when this all blows up in your face. Blood matters, Claire, not paperwork." I began to feel like a prisoner in the farmhouse. At night, I'd lock the doors and double-check the windows, not because I thought they'd physically hurt me, but because I didn't trust what their anger might drive them to do. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a fortress under siege. I couldn't even enjoy the garden without wondering if Rebecca's car might pull into the driveway, or if my father would appear at the gate demanding a conversation. Court hearings came in waves, each one draining me more. Their lawyer kept circling back to the same arguments, that I had isolated my grandparents, that I had influenced them unfairly, that leaving everything to one grandchild was unnatural. I wanted to scream that there was nothing unnatural about love, that my grandparents had chosen me because I had chosen them every single day of my life. Instead, I sat quietly listening, trying to stay strong as they dismantled my character piece by piece. Daniel, my lawyer, was a lifeline. After one particularly brutal session where my father claimed I had always been selfish, Daniel took me aside. "Claire," he said, "I've seen families torn apart like this before. It's never about fairness. It's about greed. But you have something they don't: the truth and the will. Don't let their cruelty make you doubt yourself." His words steadied me, but when I got home that night, I collapsed into my grandmother's armchair and sobbed until my chest hurt. In the middle of all this, the townspeople started to notice. My grandparents had lived in the community for decades, and people knew how close we had been. At the grocery store, neighbors would stop me and say, "Your grandparents adored you, Claire. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." One woman, Mrs. Henson, who had been my grandmother's best friend, clasped my hands one day and said, "I know for a fact they wanted you to have it all. They told me so. Don't let your family rewrite the story." Those words lit a fire in me. For once, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending my grandparents' legacy. Still, the pressure was suffocating. One night, Rebecca actually showed up at the farmhouse. She stood on the porch, her eyes blazing, and pounded on the door. "Claire, open up," she shouted. "We need to settle this now." My hands shook as I held the lock shut. "Go home, Rebecca," I yelled through the door. "This isn't the way." She cursed me, her words muffled by the wood, and eventually stormed off into the night. I sank to the floor, trembling, realizing just how far this had gone. The next day in court, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood up, my voice trembling but clear. My grandparents raised me when my parents didn't. They fed me, clothed me, comforted me when I was sick. They came to every school event, every recital. They didn't leave me everything because I manipulated them. They left it to me because I was there, because I loved them, because I was family to them in the ways that mattered. And no matter what happens here, that truth will never change. The courtroom went quiet. My parents stared at me with tight jaws, but for the first time, I didn't feel small under their gaze. I felt strong. Afterward, Daniel leaned over and whispered, "That was powerful. Don't underestimate what it means to speak your truth out loud." And though I knew the battle wasn't over, a shift had happened inside me. I was no longer just defending myself. I was claiming my place, my worth, and the love my grandparents had given me. But my family wasn't done fighting. If anything, my defiance only fueled their desperation. And as the case dragged deeper into motions and hearings, I realized they were willing to tear apart every shred of our connection, all for the chance at what my grandparents had trusted me with. And I knew then that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war for my identity, for the bond one had with the only people who had ever truly loved me. The weeks bled into months, and the courthouse became a second home I never asked for. Every time I walked through those double doors, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. The family I once longed to please now sat across the aisle, whispering with their lawyer, glaring at me as though I were the thief. It was surreal, because I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't begged or schemed. All I had done was love my grandparents the way they had loved me. And now, that love had turned into the very weapon my parents and siblings used against me. I began to notice how carefully they tried to twist every detail. Rebecca produced photographs of herself with my grandparents at Christmas, smiling beside the tree, as if one holiday visit erased years of absence. Alan brought up the one summer he spent helping Grandpa fix the fence, retelling the story as though it had been the foundation of their entire bond. My mother painted herself as the dutiful daughter, claiming she had always cared for her parents, when the truth was she had left them alone most weekends while chasing social events. It was infuriating to sit there and hear them rewrite history, knowing the judge didn't have the full picture of our lives. One night after a long hearing, I came back to the farmhouse and walked through every room in the dark. I traced my fingers across the kitchen counter where Grandma used to knead dough, lingered by the fireplace where Grandpa told me stories, and finally stood in their bedroom doorway. The smell of lavender still faintly clung to the curtains. "Why did you leave me all this?" I whispered into the silence. "You knew it would destroy us." My tears dripped onto the floorboards. Deep down, though, I already knew their answer. They hadn't done this to hurt the others. They had done it to protect me. It was around this time that I started finding unexpected allies. A neighbor named Paul, who had helped my grandparents with the land, showed up one morning with a bag of fresh apples. "Claire," he said, "I don't know what your family is saying in that courtroom, but I know the truth. I saw you here every weekend. I saw you mowing the lawn when your siblings didn't bother to visit. I saw you take Margaret to her doctor's appointments. Don't let them convince you otherwise." His words steadied me. Others came too. Mrs. Henson wrote me a letter offering to testify if needed, explaining how often she had seen me by their side. The community, piece by piece, began to validate what I already knew, that my grandparents' decision wasn't random, it was deserved. But validation didn't ease the sting of my parents' cruelty. One Sunday, after another grueling session with lawyers, my father called me directly. His voice was sharp, almost threatening. "Claire, you're dragging this family name through the mud. You think you're strong now, but you're standing alone. Do you really want to make enemies of all of us?" My hands trembled as I held the phone. "I'm not the one who made enemies, Dad," I said quietly. "You did, the day you decided money mattered more than me." He hung up without a word, leaving me shaking but strangely proud of myself. Still, their words burrowed into me at night. I'd lie awake replaying every accusation, every glare. Was I selfish? Was I tearing the family apart? Then I'd remember Grandma's diary, the words she had written just for me. "Claire deserves to feel chosen." And I'd clutch those pages like a lifeline, whispering to myself, I was chosen. I was enough. The turning point came during a particularly brutal hearing. Their lawyer tried once more to argue that I had manipulated my grandparents. He asked pointed questions, trying to trap me into admitting I had pressured them. My heart pounded, but I took a deep breath and told the truth. "No. I never asked them for anything. I never begged them for money or land. I only asked for their time, their love. And that's what they gave me, willingly. Maybe that's something my parents and siblings will never understand, but it's the truth. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Even the judge seemed moved. For the first time, I felt like my words had pierced through the fog of lies. My parents looked furious, but I didn't care. Because in that instant, I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking for my grandparents. That night, I drove back to the farmhouse with a strange sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like I was just defending myself against their accusations. I felt like I was protecting the memory of the only people who had ever made me feel truly loved. And that gave me a strength my parents could never take away. But deep down, I also knew something darker. Desperate people don't back down easily. And my family was only growing more desperate with each passing day. As the case dragged on, I began to realize just how far my parents were willing to go. Every time I thought they had reached the lowest point, they found another way to hurt me. The betrayal became so suffocating that even walking into the courthouse felt like stepping into enemy territory, and these were people who were supposed to be my family. One morning, Daniel called me into his office. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes lined with the strain of weeks of paperwork. "Claire," he said, "your parents' lawyer just filed a new motion. They're claiming undue influence again, but this time they've submitted affidavits from your siblings, saying you deliberately isolated your grandparents from the rest of the family." My mouth went dry. "Isolated them?" I repeated, my voice trembling. Daniel nodded grimly. "They're saying you turned them against your parents, that you poisoned their minds." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. To hear Rebecca's words in a sworn statement, that I had been manipulative, that I had kept them away, was more painful than anything she had ever said to my face. Alan's affidavit was just as cruel, painting me as some schemer who used kindness as a weapon to secure the inheritance. I slammed the papers shut, tears blurring my vision. How could they do this? I whispered. They know it's a lie. They know I was the one who stayed. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Because for them, this isn't about truth anymore. It's about money. They're willing to destroy your reputation to get it. The stress started to bleed into my health. I lost sleep, my appetite disappeared, and headaches throbbed behind my eyes. There were mornings when I'd sit at the farmhouse kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee, wondering if I should just give them what they wanted, divide the inheritance, end this nightmare. But then I would open Grandma's diary again, running my fingers over her words. Claire was our blessing. She deserves to feel safe. Those sentences grounded me. They reminded me that giving up would mean betraying not just myself, but the two people who had trusted me above all. Then something unexpected happened. Marlene, my boss at the nonprofit, invited me to dinner one evening after seeing how drained I looked at work. As I sat in her warm, candlelit kitchen, she asked gently, "What's happening, Claire? You're carrying more than you're saying." For the first time, I opened up fully. I told her everything, the inheritance, the court battles, the way my parents had turned on me. She listened without judgment, her hand occasionally resting on mine as I spoke. When I finally finished, she said softly, "Families can wound us deeper than anyone else. But Claire, I want you to remember something. You are not alone. You have people who see you, who know your heart. Your grandparents knew it, and I know it too." Her words cracked something open in me, and I cried into her shoulder like a child. A few days later, a letter arrived at the farmhouse. At first, I feared it was another legal threat, but when I opened it, I found a handwritten note from Mrs. Henson, my grandmother's friend. She had heard about the court case and wrote, "If you need me to testify, I will. I saw you here, Claire. I saw how much you cared. Don't let them erase that truth." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing with relief. For once, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Back in court, Daniel presented evidence that my grandparents had been of sound mind when they wrote the will. Medical records, notarized statements, and even old letters from them where they had talked about their wishes. Piece by piece, the lies my parents built began to crack. I watched my father's jaw tighten as the judge questioned their lawyer, watched Rebecca squirm as her affidavit was cross-examined, and for the first time, I felt the tide might be turning, but the damage to my soul was already deep. I could never look at my family the same way again. Every time I glanced across the aisle, I didn't see parents or siblings. I saw adversaries. I saw people who had chosen greed over love, pride over truth. And the little girl inside me, the one who had once begged for their approval, finally began to die. That night, I sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the stars scattered above me, the old wooden swing creaking under my weight. I whispered into the night, "Grandma, Grandpa, I'm trying. I'm trying so hard to hold on to what you gave me. Please give me the strength to keep going." And though the night air was silent, I felt a strange calm settle over me, as if they were there, sitting beside me, reminding me that love was louder than greed. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt resolve. By the time the 6th month of hearings rolled around, I was a shadow of who I once was. The farmhouse no longer felt like the peaceful refuge my grandparents had created, but rather the command center of a war I never wanted. Papers cluttered the kitchen table, court summons piled high, and every ring of the phone made my stomach twist. I was exhausted, drained of both energy and hope. But I also knew one thing. I couldn't give in. It was during one of the longer hearings that the cracks in my parents' case began to show. Their lawyer, aggressive as ever, demanded that the will was unnatural, since parents usually leave estates to their children, not grandchildren. Daniel calmly stood and replied, "What's unnatural, Your Honor, is ignoring the bond between these grandparents and this granddaughter. For years, Claire was their caretaker, their confidant, their family in every sense of the word. The only thing unnatural here is the greed trying to erase that truth." His words echoed in the courtroom, and for the first time, I saw the judge lean back, considering. Rebecca took the stand next, her tone laced with bitterness. She painted a picture of me as manipulative, claiming I had kept everyone else at a distance. But under cross-examination, Daniel gently asked, "How many times did you visit your grandparents in the last 5 years?" Rebecca hesitated, shifting in her seat. I was busy. Busy. Daniel pressed. "Would you say more than 10 times?" Silence. "More than 5. Her face flushed. "Probably not," she muttered. I held my breath as the truth slipped out, because no amount of bitterness could cover for neglect. Alan fared no better. When questioned about his relationship with my grandparents, he boasted about the summer he helped Grandpa with the fence. But when asked what medication Grandma had been on during her last year, he faltered. I don't remember." Daniel tilted his head. "But Claire does. Because she was there." The courtroom went quiet. In that silence, the difference between us was laid bare. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for the love and trust one had earned through years of presence. After that hearing, I drove home trembling, not from fear this time, but from relief. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was starting to shine through. That night, I cooked myself one of Grandma's recipes, her famous chicken pot pie, and as I ate alone at the kitchen table, I whispered, "We're getting there. I promise I won't let you down." But the battle was taking its toll. My job at the nonprofit suffered as I juggled court dates and endless paperwork. Marlene pulled me aside gently one afternoon. "Claire, you need to take care of yourself. You're burning out." Her concern broke me, and I admitted through tears how lost I felt. She hugged me tightly and said, "No matter how this ends, remember this. You are more than this fight. Don't let them take you from yourself." Her words lingered in my heart, even as I trudged back into the war zone. The final blow from my family came in the form of a dinner invitation. Against my better judgment, I went, hoping maybe they wanted peace. But the moment I walked into my parents' dining room, the air was thick with tension. My father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "Claire," he said, "you still have a chance to end this quietly. Sign over half of the inheritance, and we'll drop the case." My mother nodded, her eyes sharp. "It's what's fair." Rebecca smirked, and Alan stared at me like a predator waiting for a kill. My chest tightened, but for the first time, I didn't falter. I set down my fork and looked at each of them. Fair, I said, my voice steady. Fair would have been showing up when I was a child and needed parents. Fair would have been loving Grandma and Grandpa when they were alive instead of circling like vultures now. Fair would have been respecting their wishes instead of trying to erase them. You don't want fairness. You want control. And you won't get it from me. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's eyes filled with cold fury, and Rebecca muttered something under her breath. But I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the night air hit my face like freedom. For the first time, I felt lighter. Because I knew then that no matter what the court decided, I had already won something greater. The strength to stand up for myself. Driving back to the farmhouse, I turned the radio off and let the silence wash over me. The same silence that had once haunted me now felt like armor. I wasn't just Claire, the girl caught in the middle of her parents' greed. I was Claire, the granddaughter chosen out of love, and no judge, no lawyer, no sibling could take that away from me. But as the final court date loomed, I knew this fight wasn't just about property anymore. It was about closure. And I was ready, finally, to face the end. The morning of the final hearing, I stood in front of the mirror in the farmhouse, smoothing down my blazer with trembling hands. My stomach twisted with nerves, but beneath the fear there was a current of calm I hadn't felt before. This was it, the day everything would be decided. I whispered to myself, Grandma, Grandpa, give me strength, and tucked their letter into my bag like a shield. The courtroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was just me shivering. My parents sat across the aisle, Rebecca and Alan flanking them like soldiers ready for battle. They didn't even look at me. Their lawyer stood tall, reciting once more that the will was unnatural, that I had manipulated my grandparents, that love alone was not justification for leaving me everything. His words sounded rehearsed, hollow, and I felt a strange detachment as I listened, like I was watching a play I no longer feared. Then it was Daniel's turn. He rose slowly, his voice steady, carrying the weight of months of truth. Your Honor, he began, what we've heard again and again from the contesting family is speculation, bitterness, and resentment. What we have in black and white is a legally valid will, signed with clear mind and intent. What we have in testimony from neighbors and community members is evidence of a granddaughter who is present every single day. And what we have, perhaps most importantly, is the legacy of two people who chose with their hearts. That is not unnatural. That is love. And it deserves to be honored. The judge's eyes lingered on me for a moment before she spoke. This court finds no evidence of undue influence or coercion. The will of Margaret and Henry Whitmore is valid in its entirety. The estate belongs solely to Claire Whitmore. For a second, I couldn't process the words. Then it hit me. I had won. Not just the case, but the battle for my grandparents' memory, for their wishes, for my own dignity. My hands shook as I exhaled, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. Across the room, my parents looked stunned. Rebecca muttered angrily, and Alan slammed his folder shut. But none of it mattered anymore. I had carried the truth to the finish line, and the truth had prevailed. When I left the courthouse, the spring air felt fresher than it had in months. Reporters weren't there. Neighbors weren't waiting. It was just me walking down the stone steps, holding my head higher than I ever thought I could. Daniel patted my shoulder and said, "They can't touch you anymore. Go live your life." And for the first time in a long while, I believed I could. That evening, I sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the setting sun painting the sky in gold and pink. I held Grandma's diary in my lap, the pages worn from all the nights I clutched it for strength. I whispered aloud, "We did it. I kept my promise." The farmhouse creaked in the soft wind, and I imagined them sitting there with me, smiling, proud. Not because I had won money or land, but because I had finally learned to stand on my own 2 feet, as for my parents and siblings. Our relationship never recovered. The case had burned every bridge left between us. And though part of me still grieves the family I wish I had, I also understand something now. Sometimes protecting yourself means letting go of people who refuse to love you the way you deserve. My grandparents gave me everything, not just their estate, but the lesson that I was worthy of love, of trust, of being chosen. That is what I carry forward. And to all of you who have listened to my story until the very end, I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, for standing beside me in spirit the way my grandparents once did. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people meant to protect you, remember this: you are not defined by their greed or their cruelty. You are defined by the love you give and the strength you build when you refuse to back down. Please celebrate yourself. Hold on to the people who show up for you, even if they're not the ones you expected. And if my story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and left a like. It helps me keep sharing pieces of truth and resilience. Because in the end, telling these stories reminds us that none of us are truly alone.